want to welcome everyone to the day two of the conference on inclusive governance, breaking the barriers to inclusive governance in Nigeria. The conference began yesterday. Yesterday we had two sessions. If you've been following, you'd notice that there have been a form of progression in the conference. We started yesterday with by examining human rights, how we can ensure that human rights are well enforced in Nigeria, because you cannot have an inclusive governance, you cannot have a democracy without human rights being guaranteed. And we had Barrister Olufemi Adeniton, who took us through the first section yesterday, and that was immediately followed by the second session, which was we had Professor Pogosin. She presented on the youths and women in Nigeria's contemporary politics, challenges and prospects, and that gave us the opportunity to look at how we can integrate, how we can address the problem of marginalization, which largely affects youths and women in Nigeria's politics. And if you were with us yesterday, I believe you must have noticed that both speakers made mention of two important things. The first speaker, for instance, noted the fact that we need judicial reforms in Nigeria in order for us to be able to have an effective justice system. And the second speaker also mentioned the fact that we need government to create an enabling environment that would encourage youth to stay in Nigeria and develop the country as a way of addressing the constant brain drain syndrome that the country has been experiencing for the past couple of years. These two cogent points point to the fact that inclusive governance cannot just occur on its own. In other words, there is a role for the state to play in ensuring inclusive governance. And today, we are going to be having two sessions. The first session will be looking at the role of the state. In other words, what is the state meant to do in order for us to be able to have an inclusive governance in Nigeria. And in the second session, we'll be looking at the role of responsible citizenship. Being a citizen in a country does not, it's not just what it is. Being a citizen gives you certain responsibilities, certain duties, and that is what we'll be looking at in our second session. So the first session, which is the third session for the conference, will be beginning now, and I'll be calling on Mr. Samuel Ayoko to read the citation of our speaker and to invite our speaker to take the podium. Mr. Samuel, please.
All right, good morning, everyone.
Yeah, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm most happy to be here this morning, and I'll be reading the citation. I'll be reading the citation of Dr. Lafenwa. Please just hold on. All right, this is just a short profile of Dr. Stephen Akinyemi Lafenwa. Dr. Lafenwa obtained his Doctor of Philosophy in Political Science in 2006 from the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. He specialized in public administration, legislative, and democratic studies. He was a laureate of Democratic Governance Institute of Codestra in 2006, and he attended the International Writing Workshop in Nairobi, Kenya, which was fully sponsored by Codestra. Dr. Lafenwa participated actively in the election observation and monitoring on behalf of International Republican Institute of the United States of America as an ad hoc official in different capacities for INEC since 1999. He is a public affairs analyst on radio, television, and other social media platforms. He was an active stakeholder of different civil society organization like Citizen Forum for Constitutional Reform, Coalition for Change, Center for Constitutional Governance, among others. He was coordinator for Distant Learning Center program on political science from 2011 to 2016, and later became the program coordinator for social sciences, DLC courses, and course supervisor for GX 103 at Center for General Studies. He has attended so many national and international workshops and conferences, as well as consulted for federal government, Oyo state government, and private organizations in training politicians, public and civil servants. Dr. Lafenwa is at present the senior lecturer, sub-dean in the Faculty of Social Sciences and a member of ASU, as well as in the University of Ibadan, elected student member. He is happily married with children. It is my pleasure this morning to invite a distinguished scholar, a renowned political scientist, conference. You are welcome, sir, Dr. Stephen Lafenwa.
Thank you very much, Samuel Ayoko. And I want to thank the organizer of this program. I can see Olariwaju Gunubi, one of my friends, at the postgraduate, and I can see Daniel Dola. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I joined yesterday, and that yesterday was so powerful. Thank God you invited the next head of department, who will assume office by Monday yesterday, and I listened to her carefully. Well prepared, well presented, and well received the lecture. And I want to thank the barrister also, though I joined late. And there are so many questions that people asked, which were very, very significant for us to understand what inclusive governance, our roles, the role of government, and so on and so forth. Today, I want to present, on breaking the barriers to inclusive governance in Nigeria, the role of the state. When you talk about the state, when you talk about the state, you see that the state is an abstract entity in the sense we cannot touch the state, we cannot see the state, but we can feel the impact of the state through its agency that we refer to as government. So if we talk about state and without talking about the government, then we are making a big mistake. And that's why it's very, very important for us to understand the state with the perspective of the government, performing, the function of the state. And it is through the agency of government that we can feel the impact of the state. Be that as it may, inclusive governance is a very significant concept when it comes to governing society, governing the people, governing organization, and it is an integral feature or characteristic of what we call good governance agenda. When you look at it nowadays, many people talk about governance, but they don't understand what are the aspects of governance and what are the roles that we can play as citizens, and what's the role of government who is acting on behalf of the state. In fact, with the 2030 agenda, now sustainable development agenda, it is very clear that building inclusive states and societies is widely understood as a central concern for international development. So when we talk about inclusive governance, it's not something that we only relate to sustainable development here. We are talking about an issue which also affects international development. Let me give you an example. When we have issue with when there are issues with in Liberia and Sierra Leone, majority of Liberians, and Sierra Leoneans. They fled their country and they came to Nigeria. And that became an international issue and developmental concerns for Nigeria. In fact, up to today, some of the Sierra Leoneans and Liberians have refused to go. And they are also part of, Nigerians sharing our resources. So if there's a problem, of governance in Nigeria today, the spillover effect. We get to, Republic of Benin, Ghana, Togo, and the rest. Even Europe will not be spared. And also we know the use of the use of Russian Ukrainian conflict is now affecting the entire world. So when we talk about inclusive governance, we are not talking about local issue, we are talking about an international issue. And people have already observed through historical trajectories that inclusive states and societies are more prosperous, effective, and resilient in the long run. Look at the United States of America, so inclusive that Barack Obama from Africa here became, a president. Can you just imagine, a Briton, despite that Britain, colonized Nigeria, becoming president of Nigeria, and there will not be political crisis, and people will not talk. So that is why most of our people are migrating to Europe, migrating to Canada, migrating to America, because of their inclusive governance policy. And there are a lot of barriers we know, which we are going to talk about. There are so many, but we are going to limit ourselves to some that are very critical, which we have to break for us to have inclusive governance in Nigeria. We know language barrier. So many of us cannot accommodate people that are speaking different language apart from our own native language. At times when we are doing admission, you talk about ELDS, educational-led developed states. Particular set of people from particular region always take advantage of that. And they all know, if you claim that you are Stephen Lafenwa and you are now claiming to be from Adamawa State, they will know from the language I speak, and they don't want to tolerate that. Ethnic tribal differences, there is these differences are there. In fact, up to today, majority of our students who work for youth service in different areas, hardly can they stay there and get a job and settle there, because they will tell them, where do you come from? Religion differences, this is, in fact, is very, very, it's coming, to the front border now that we are moving towards the election time. What people have been asking about, talking about Muslim tickets. You can just imagine, if with the different kind of challenges that we're facing with, as far as democracy and development is concerned, people are talking about Muslim, ticket. That is not something that we should adopt. And corruption, as we are going to see later, it has discriminative effect. Most of the time, the elite who are so corrupt are the one enjoying, the largest and the resources of the state. Why, the less privileged, masses of people are suffering. And there is no way corruption will allow you to accommodate or have an inclusive policy, because those who are benefiting will never allow those who are not benefiting to join the queue. And the rule of law, non-adherence to the rule of law. So many times I've argued in the classroom that it's not the constitution that are a problem, the constitution that we have that is a problem. It is lack of, constitutionalism, adherence, to the provisions in the constitution. We know that there may be anomalies, but with time we overcome those anomalies. But what we will discover is that, people don't, follow what is even written down in the constitution, particularly those political elite. Now, my argument is that if inclusive governance is very, very critical to good governance and sustainable development in Nigeria, in particular, and Africa in general, the role of state supposed also to be critical. And we have to consider that role of the state. So that is our preoccupation, in this discourse. We can move to the next one. Now, the first, where we start from is for us to understand what inclusive governance is. Because when you understand the concept, you may be able to understand some challenges or issues that surround that concept. And as I've said earlier, governance is a generic concept, and inclusive governance is a part, an integral part of governance. And I will say that I will start by defining what governance is all about. Francis Fukuyama, argued that governance relates to the ability of a state to make and enforce rules and to deliver services irrespective of the kind of regime that is in place. So whether it is democratic or authoritarian or a hybrid or combined, feature of both. That's what I'm saying, that whether you have, authoritarian regime, you have a democratic regime, you have a federal, with the system, you have non-federal system, governance is the recurring decimal. Services must be delivered. And when you talk about services to be delivered, those services, must have, there must be provision for them in the Constitution that people have the right to enjoy those services. And also the government has also the role to provide those services. Most of the time, people argue that, oh, government is not doing this. Do you have right? Even, we can also ask about government, whether they have a role to play, in providing some certain services. You look at economy, you see the kind of role that government is playing. Let me make it clear to some of our audience here. When you talk about the society, there are three critical factors that must play their role, accordingly. And if, the other one fails to, play its role, it will affect the others, or the other sectors supposed to come in. Number one has to do with market. The market forces, are invisible, but they affect what we do and what we refuse to do. If you go to the market now, it is not the government that will determine the price. If you say, oh, yes, I'm from Nigeria, I'm a Nigerian, I'm a citizen of this country, now give me Gari, a Congo of Gari. If you don't pay the correct amount, they won't give you anything. And it is when we have, the excesses of this market forces, are obvious, that we now have the state to come in. The state is, a force supposed to check the excesses of the market forces. Because when there is inflation, when there is, surplus, government is supposed to intervene so that people will not suffer. For example, now government is paying subsidy, for petroleum products. Because if they allow the market forces to go, to go on to fix the price, some of us will be out there protesting against the government. And also we know that government will also have its excesses, in exercising his role, exercising his power, playing his role. And that's why the another critical force, civil society, supposed to come in to check this, the excesses of the state. But what we have in Nigeria is that we have allowed market forces and government forces to continue to display their excesses without, any viral or stronger civil society to check those abuses and the excesses. And that is by the way. Then you can also look at governance as the ability of actors to perform, towards objectives and ambitions that derive from dynamic interaction, power and power struggle among actors of the state. The most important thing is that whatever method we are going to use, objectives are there to achieve. And in achieving those objectives, there are going to be interplay between, those forces that I've talked about struggling to control the heart of the state. And there are so many actors and not, state many state actors and non-state actors that affect our behavior and affect what we have and affect the kind of objective that we are set for ourselves to achieve in any particular society. And governance has to do with delivery of political goods. I've said it. Safety and security is one of those political goods. Please, that person has played music to help us. Okay, thank you very much. One of the political goods is safety and security. I always tell people that there is difference between safety and security. You may be safe and you are not secured, and you may be secured and you are not safe. You know how many security guards, mounting security, whatever, to protect our, politicians. Some of them have even been kidnapped. That means they are secured, but they're not safe. And some of us that we are not secured, we are more, we are safe. And we cannot just say that when somebody is safe, he is secured. No. And when you are secured, you are safe. So safety and security is part of the political goods that must be delivered through governance. Then rule of law, very, very important. Not rule of man and not rule by man. Is rule of law. That means whatever the law says. Transparency is another political good. Effective tackling of corruption, that is another political good. Participation in human rights. And we have human development. These are political goals that should be delivered through governance. And I said here, it is misnomer for us to talk about good governance or bad governance. Why? Every governance is supposed to be good. So when people talk about, good governance or we have bad governance, it shouldn't be the case. Our emphasis should be how to promote good governance in our country. We move on to the next one. Understanding inclusive governance. I said it is misnomer, but we still talk about it because, there are methods of governance that are bad. When you talk about ideals of good governance, you talk about equality, talk about justice, freedom, transparency, and accountability of government to the people. Good governance is enjoyed where there is equal treatment and opportunity for all citizens. Equal justice, compensation where people are wrong, promotion and appointment are based on merit and not favor, freedom to express your opinion and your view, criticizing government, easy access to independent and impartial courts with honest judges, and more importantly, adequate opportunity is given to the people to be part of their government. Integrity and probity in government amongst officials and agencies are also part of what referred to as the ideals of good governance. Now, what is inclusive governance, which is an integral part of the governance that we have talked about? Inclusive governance, refers to a normative sensibility that stands in favor of inclusion as the benchmark against which institution can be judged and also promoted. When you talk about it's a norm which may not be adhered to, because there is difference between what ought to and what is. What ought to, and what makes sense when you talk about governance is that we include every stakeholder. In fact, in the 2020 agenda for sustainable development by the United Nations, it is pledged that no one should be left behind. Inclusive governance is talking about no one will be left behind in making policies, in also getting results from the policy we have implemented. No one will be left behind. You may ask yourself, why do people reject government policy when we know that government stage have evils that we cannot avoid? They are unavoidable evils, because right from the time you are born up to the time they are going to one is going to the grave, the state, even in the grave, the state still has control, because somebody that is buried in burial may be removed from that place if they want to use the place for another thing. And that's why we should not be left behind when we are making decisions and when we are sharing the outcomes, or we are sharing the benefits of the outcomes of our decisions. In fact, the inclusive governance initiative that we have in Africa here, Sub-Saharan Africa, so to speak, talks about making African countries increasingly accountable to and inclusive of their entire populations, including sexual and gender minorities, who are often particularly marginalized and excluded. So when you talk about inclusive governance, it's not only local, it's not national, it is continental, it is international. And it has to do with two aspects. Inclusive governance has two aspects. The first one is inclusion as process. And also inclusion, has a outcome. We're talking about process-based inclusive governance and outcome-based inclusive governance. So, and both inclusion as a process and that of inclusion as an outcome, are very critical to development outcomes. If people are involved at the level of initiating ideas, formulating policy, implementing policy, people will identify with that policy. They will own that policy. And when the outcome, begin to yield what benefit, they are also part of it. So they will not blame government if anything goes wrong. And they will not only praise government if things are going in the right direction. They will also praise themselves. But when you exclude the people at the process level and you exclude them when the outcome is what, they will complain, there will be protest, there will be crisis, there will be demonstrations. People will have what we call they will lose confidence and trust in governance and in government. And that is why it is very, very important for us to pay attention to this inclusive governance. Then when you talk about process-based inclusion, it refers to how decisions are made, who is included in decision-making processes, and how and why, whose voices what can't, and how these dynamics and interactions shape both the nature and quality of decisions taken and how they are implemented. Let me give you an example of how the Constitution that we are presently operating in Nigeria came into being. It became imperative for Abdulsalam, the government, to take over when Abacha died in 1998. And instead of them to organize an all-inclusive meetings where the framework, the legal framework that we are going to build our democracy upon, they refuse to do that. They call certain people and they have them to go and give us the Constitution. And in the preamble, what is written there is that we, the people of Nigeria, you now ask yourself, are you part of the inclusion, the process? So why, did they, involve those who were involved and, excluded so many people? And that's why up to today, people are saying, let us abandon that, constitution. It's either we have a new one or we, reform and re-engineer that constitution. And the extent to which governor is more or less inclusive has to do with the extent to and ways in which people and groups that have been traditionally left out or marginalized, are incorporated. It depends. Those, that have been marginalized, the women. Let us be realistic. I'm not saying this because a woman gave birth to me, I have a wife or a daughter or whatever. When you talk about governance in Nigeria, it is men-based. And it has been so right from the time we were even in the pre-colonial era, up to the time we entered into the colonial era. And now that we are in the post-colonial era, you can imagine how many women are there in the National Assembly, Houses of Assembly. In fact, it is a taboo now in the National Assembly in Nigeria, you may not know, because there are certain, religious people from the North who will never allow a woman to become the Senate Speaker, a Senate President, and the House of Rep Speaker. It didn't last. It didn't last because some of them said, it's a taboo for them to be bowed down for a woman. They don't allow that in their own religion. So you can now see how women has been put aside in terms of decision making, and when the outcome comes, you see, who benefit. They don't benefit as much as men are benefiting from the existing policies. Young people, despite the fact that they have already made passed the bill into law, not too young to rule. How many young people are there? Even it may even surprise you that the youth officer of a particular party is of age 60 or 65 or 55. And that person will be tagged as the youth coordinator, the youth leader, who will never have any significant impact or input when they are making decisions. And when the largest come, how many of the young people are enjoying? In fact, I would say when I was growing up, what gave me hope then was that, I'm growing up and they always tell us, the youth of today are leaders of tomorrow. Who am I leading today now? Do I have, what we refer to as, do I have a 100 million naira to purchase a form or 40 million naira to purchase a form for the National Assembly election or whatever? Ethnic and religious, people, they have been marginalized. There's some group, and even you look at how they are creating states today. They are creating states to continue to marginalize the ethnic minorities. In the 60s, up to the time they created states in Nigeria, Kwara was part of the Southwest, the Yoruba land. Part of what we call Edo State today and Delta State, part of them are from the Yoruba land. And when you go to the north, the same thing. When you go to the east, the same thing. So, and that's why you hear everyone, all these ethnic minorities, crying of what? Marginalization. And religious groups, Muslim ticket, you see, Christian being killed, some Muslims have been marginalized in some certain organizations, and some Muslims, Christians have been marginalized in certain agencies of government. Disabled people. These are, in fact, if there is an international court indeed, they should have taken Nigeria to international court. How many people recruit disabled people? It is nowadays that people are now saying, okay, physically challenged people, we should talk about them. Transit and migrant populations. These are people that are supposed to be part of, the political process. Because they may be, may be in transit. I'm talking about foreigners, even the migrants. They also constitute, a significant, part of our country. they're supposed to play their roles. But how many of them, even some of them are even enjoying, some of those infrastructure better than those people who are citizens of the country. Let's move on. The outcome based now. When you talk about the outcome based inclusion, it refers to question of distributional equity. How do you distribute, the resources? How do you redistribute? Who are the people you are providing for? Are you only doing it because of your own ethnic group? Because you come from an ethnic group? Or you are doing it because of, on the basis of religion, or because of the language you speak, or because of, some personal interest? How we, distribute developmental outcomes is part of what we call inclusion or inclusive governance. Infrastructural, health, resources, education, water and sanitation, social welfare, justice, even justice. Some people, in fact, they have accused a particular ethnic group of enjoying more favor from the present world regime, even up to the time, up to the level of going to the police station. So, if it is this person from this particular ethnic group, I will just recourse to the court of God, because they know that they will never get justice. And look at the security issue. Why are they, politicizing security when it's supposed to be every person's, every citizen's, affair? Outcome-based inclusion speaks to who benefit from prosperity, one, and to what effect. So when you talk about inclusive governance, is when national or regional government enable the input of citizens in decision-making processes and allow them to be part of those who enjoy the gains of the outcomes. I think we have to move faster now because of our time. Inclusive governance is very significant because, one, it enables governmental policies to be contested so that we can have a better policy. When everybody criticize and pass their comment, put their input, you get the result for it. I will never forget 1977 great debate. That was what made us, everybody, whether you're academics or not academics, politicians or not politicians, legal luminaries and non-legal luminaries, they were allowed to make input. And that was why we stopped the parliamentary government and we adopted the presidential system of government, because they allow people from different sectors, different social background, environmental background, economic background, working together, to get our aspiration was promoted. And it's also important because, it will enable policy to reflect the experience of the people, the emotion of the people, which are everyday what, which are everyday what affair of the people. They know it's part of them. When you abandon, their aspiration of some of certain set of people, whether be it on the basis of sex or gender, based on religion and so on and so forth, you will see that if that policy is good for everyone, certain people will reject it. And that means that policy is not good enough, to be implemented. It enables countries to unlock the potential of their diverse population. You see people, coming out to, even people in diaspora, they have something to offer. We allow them so that all of us, when we display our potentials, it will enable us to get the best, not the one we are experiencing what in Nigeria. Enabling citizens to participate in decision-making open space for more practical and fitting action that's more effective and sustainable. And also, it helps us to advance democratic values, peaceful pluralism, respect for diversity, human rights, and equality before the law, because everybody's involved. No one is left, behind. And also, it builds citizen confidence and trust in public policies, which is very, very critical. When public policy does not enjoy the confidence and trust of the people, let me tell you, it won't last. Even when you talk about building infrastructure, And that's why we lack a maintenance culture in Nigeria, because people don't own the project. They don't own the infrastructure. They think that, oh, it's government, property is everybody's property, and that's why we keep on repeating the same thing, every time, and we are not getting the kind of result that we want. And it makes citizens to accept governmental actions as legitimate. In Nigeria today, everything that government does, people don't see it as legitimate. Say, why? They question it. If those in the north are supporting, those in the south will be rejecting. And that's not what inclusive governance is all about. It helps people to have a sense of belonging and promote national unity. It also helps new policies to be compatible with the prevailing ideas in the society. There are so many things, so many policies that government have that are contrary to the prevailing ideas in our society. Most of those people who are in government today, you see that some of them are not even digital. They are not. Let me say they belong to the analog age, and that's why anything that has to do with digitalizing our affairs or issues, they don't support it. With inclusive governance, all members of the population should feel included and empowered to maintain or improve both personal well-being and that of their wider community. If they allow inclusive governance, it ensures representation and participation in decision-making processes for more just, and for just policy outcomes. It helps us, to have just policy outcomes that people will identify with, and they want to continue to identify with because they are involved. What are the barriers? I've been talking about cultural, ethnic, religious, whatever differences, and the challenges, which are very obvious in our heterogeneous entities, not only in Nigeria, even some African countries. And it has created a lot of problem. In fact, Sudan, South Sudan, came out of Sudan because of this, all these religious and ethnic differences. And up to today, they are not still enjoying the outcome of the policy of breaking away. So you can, imagine when we don't include, every stakeholder in policy making and in sharing the benefit of the policy outcome, we are going to have a lot of problems. And lack of access to protections guaranteed by law. Because in Nigeria, like in some of these African countries, our rule of law is very weak, only favoring the minority, the elite. And some people don't have access to legal system. Go to rural area, when you talk about the poor, going to the court, except, as our lawyer said yesterday, unless they will do it pro bono, how many of them, by the time they charge you, in fact, you are going to rest your case and say, let it be. Unenforced law or partiality in the administration of justice. These are very, very, obvious, when it comes to Nigeria. They constitute barriers to inclusive governance. Corruption, as I've said, is a major obstacle. Sustainable development and negatively impact on the lives of the poorest. You can see the discriminate impact of corruption today. Can you imagine how much is ASU asking federal government to use to finance the education, sector in the tertiary institutions? And a person stole 170 billion naira. The amount of money that ASU has gotten from Buhari's administration is not up to 70 billion naira. And that's what we're talking about. Their children are going to school. That's why they have stolen our money. And our own children are in their father's house. And that's, it has effect, because when these children that are not taken care of, they are not part of governance, when they grow up and become somebody, are they going to have sense of belonging? Are they going to do something very great for their country? Many developing countries like Nigeria struggle to connect enough domestic revenue to fund essential public services. That's why some people are better off and some people are not, and they are excluded. When it comes to health, even in UCH, there is what we call private suit for the rich. So if your illness is critical and supposed to be attended to in the private suit, if you don't have money, you will not go, they won't allow you to get there. Education, now, we see so many private universities springing up. How many of children from poor families can attend those private universities? I've taught in those private universities before, and I know what it means to have children over there. Water and sanitation, we all know there that government do not generate enough revenue to take care of everybody when it comes to all these issues. Social society and civic space are under threat in many countries in Africa. In fact, you see, when Dogo was reading my citation, I work with a civil society organization that produced a constitution, people-based constitution, before the advent of the Fourth Republic. We were sharing this view so that other people can, contribute, and we fine-tune whatever. The soldiers and whatever those agents of government did not allow us to do that. Some of us were arrested. Some of us were beaten. And you know what happened in the 1993 June 12 in Brooklyn? These are some of the the things that affected or constituting barriers to inclusive governance in Nigeria. Breaking the barriers now. Now let us talk about the role of the Nigerian state, which is our major problem. I'm sorry, I'm taking your time. The crisis of governance in Nigeria is a complex one, largely because it revolves around an organism called the state, so complex and sophisticated in nature. When you talk about, I told you about the nature of the state. You cannot, see the state. You can't touch the state. You can't smell the state. You can only feel the impact of the state through its agency government. And in terms of definition, there is confusion. People define, state, to suit their own purposes. And when it comes to characteristic of the state, you understand why the state is behaving the way it's behaving. The state has the monopoly of legitimate use of force. The state, also commands universal jurisdiction that controls everything within its jurisdiction. And its jurisdiction is compulsory. That means you have to obey. Even when they are doing something that is, inimical to your interest, you have to obey. Even when your fundamental human rights are abused, you have to obey. These are some of the things that is creating problem for inclusive governance when it comes to the role that the state should play. The Supreme Court of the United States, used the state to denote a people or a community of individuals united more or less closely in political relations, inhabiting temporarily or permanently the same country. Often it denotes only the country or territorial region inhabited by such community. Not infrequently, it is applied to the government under which the people would live. At other times, it represents the combined ideal of people, territory, and government. When you look at all these characteristics of the state that the Supreme Court used to define what state is more than that. When it comes to the state, in action. And since the state is an national identity, it performs its role and responsibility through the agency or apparatus of government, as I've said earlier. In our own, concerning the Nigerian state, the 1999 Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria provides for the roles and responsibility that government should play as far as inclusive governance is concerned. And they are contained under the fundamental objectives and directive principles of the state policies. If government, that is the agency of the state, has been, up and doing or complying or trying to achieve these fundamental objectives, in fact, inclusive governance will not be what we'll be discussing today. We'll see. The fundamental objectives are those principles laid down by the Constitution as ideals that the government should aim at when carrying out their policies. These are supposed to give direction to those who are in governance, how best the society should be ruled to the best advantage and benefit of what? Of all. And when you look at it, let me just, when you look at the section 13 and 14, it provides that all persons, organs, of government or any authority for that matter must act and exercise its power in conformity with the ideals set out under these objectives and principles, and provide the ideals that should guide the government in its relation with the people. You can go to the Constitution of Nigeria, you see there. The fundamental obligation of the state, particularly those levels of government, be it federal, state, and local government, number one is to observe the principle of democracy and social justice while carrying out the act of governance. The system of administration in this tier of government must be democratic, based on the principles of what is fair and just to the people. Recognize that power belongs to the people and that the constitution is supreme. Use this power to promote security and welfare of the people. Ensure that people participate in their government through a democratic process as laid down by the Constitution. In fact, the provision also, the provision in this regard, is meant to promote national unity, inclusivity, give a general sense of belonging, as well as promote unity among the people, since Nigeria is made up of different ethnic groups. So let us now go to the specifics now. When you're talking about inclusive governance, as far as the political objective is concerned, these are what the Nigerian state should do. They should, number one, ensure that there is no discrimination of any kind, either on the basis of origin, sex, religion, ethnic, or linguistic type. But we have already shot ourselves in the leg. When we are filling the form, go and check it. Any form you fill, they will tell you local government of origin. While is it there? They would even ask you religion. They will tell you sex. Is it not, are they not, part of those things that can make us to discriminate and exclude some people and favor others? Provision of adequate facilities. The citizens is free to live in any part of Nigeria without fear. But today, what do we have? That marriage is encouraged between people from different ethnic groups, religion, and background. That every Nigerian feels that he belongs and is involved in government. That if these political objectives have been achieved, why will we be talking about inclusive governance at this point in time? That every Nigerian is loyal to the nation. Can I say I'm loyal to the nation? That corruption and abuse of government is brought to our end. You can find that in section 15. There's social objectives. It is this state, duty or role to ensure that equality of right and opportunity. They ensure that there is equality of right and opportunity, sanctity and dignity of human person. The action of state through its agency government shall not be cruel and inhuman. The natural resources of the nation shall be used for all. The health, safety, and welfare of all persons in employment, and protection of children, young persons, and the aged against exploitation, deprivation, and neglect, should be protected. But what do we have today? These are some of the roles that states should play if you are going to have the economic objectives. That the national wealth is used for the happiness. Look at that. Freedom and welfare of every citizen by giving everybody equal opportunity to the wealth of the nation. That every person is given the opportunity to engage in any economic activity he chooses to be involved in. The economic activities, however, must not be unlawful or illegal. But today, because federal government or the state government or local government have refused to fulfill this objective, our young ones, women, are now going into unlawful and illegal economic activities. Where we have prostitution, we have Yahoo boys, we have trafficking and sex trafficking, human trafficking, and so on and so forth. The wealth, they should ensure that the wealth is not collected in a few hands, that is bridging the gap between the very rich and the very poor. If the gap is not too much, you will not see people blaming the government or blaming anybody that their policies are discriminatory. Imagine, a person, in the person of Dangote, building a refinery that Nigeria in the last 62 years, we cannot build. Imagine, and you know what it means. when they said the richest person in Africa is living in Nigeria, and the poorest, Nigeria happened to be the poorest capital, the capital of the, of the poor people in the whole world, that there is suitable and adequate shelter, reasonable minimum living wage, old age care, pensions, unemployment, and sick benefits are paid to all citizens. These are what we, promote inclusive governance. Today, a professor is collecting less than $1,000, $750 as a monthly wage, and you are talking about those National Assembly members collecting about 23 million naira, per month in this same nation. And educational objectives, which is, if I concern some of us, is, the states are directing its policies toward one, providing adequate education and equal opportunity at all levels. Hey, equal opportunity. I've been involving in the admission process for the past 10 or 15 years now. Up to today, there is still provision for catchment areas. There is provision for education less developed states. When somebody scored 280 and that person cannot get admission, and somebody with 201 is having admission letter, being admitted to university. What are we talking about? Students have been at home for almost 6 months, and you don't have anything to do about it. You have not done anything about it, and your children are graduating, and you have audacity to even post the picture on the Facebook. What kind of inclusive governance is that? When you are not treating yourself, when you are healed in Nigeria, and you are saying you are going to have a free healthcare services for who? Eradicate illiteracy by providing. Look at that. In the concept they put it as and when practicable. So when it is practicable. Free, compulsory primary education, free whatever, when it is practicable. When is it going to be practicable in Nigeria? And that's why we come to the limitations. All these fundamental objectives we have seen, they are not justiciable. That means no citizen can take the government to court if the government fails to fulfill any of the provision under fundamental objectives and directive of state policy. So because they have already told you when it is practicable. So if they promise you before election that they are going to do this, they are going to do that, if they fail to do it, should it not proper? Should it not be a proper thing to put in the question that we can take them to court? But now it's not there when it is practicable. So they are just directive principle, mere ideals that government should pursue and strive for as much as possible to achieve better living conditions for all our citizens. And that's why we are getting it wrong in Nigeria. Now, quickly, we are finishing in the next 5 minutes. Way forward. We have to adopt an inclusive governance policy. It's working in Canada for them. That we seek to foster inclusive and gender equal society where individuals, the state, the civil society, and the private sector interact to make decisions and allocate resources. I've never seen a country, a developed country, where government is doing it alone. No involvement of civil society. When civil society come with idea, they reject it. Private sector, that that policy will affect. You are not involving them. That's why Naira is now in a free fall, whatever situation. Because you have not considered, the input of those who are dealing with the foreign currency. So those people will go to bank, deceive the bank, whatever executive, collect dollars, and go and sell in the black market. So these are, efforts should be focused on how to promote and protect our human rights. First thing, increase equitable access to a functioning justice system. Enhancement of participation of people in public life. Look at what happened in the Osun and Ekiti state. How many people registered to vote? How many people came out to actually to vote? You see the whatever. Who is deceiving who now? In the last election, 2019, over almost 80% registered to vote, and 15 million votes. Brought Buhari government into governance. You can imagine, out of 200 million, 50 million, then guaranteeing that public service work for everyone. this is, a critical role that states will be playing. So when you talk about promoting and protecting human rights, they can do that by strengthening the capacity of all actors in society to claim their rights and seek redress, or to uphold their obligation of responsibility to respect, protect, fulfill, or promote human rights. Increasing equitable access to a functioning justice system can be done by ensuring that justice services reach people in their communities and increasing people's legal awareness. How many people are aware of their rights? Most of the bills being passed by the National Assembly and the House of Assembly in the state, how many of them are we aware of? And how many people have, access, to legal system in Nigeria? To enhance participation in public life, we can do that by supporting local and national governance processes, by participating in politics, civic education, public sector reforms that increase diversity and inclusion. And lastly, ensuring that public service work for everyone by working with government at all levels and service provider to foster gender equality and enhance transparency and accountability, strengthening social accountability, improving public financial management, and using statistical data to guide service delivery and improvement. This is very, very important. Now they are planning for another census. Are they going to politicize it? Is it going to favor a particular religion, a particular region, or what, or not? Because we need data. This is the era of data management. And when we don't have data, inclusive governance will remain elusive. There are suggestions, by in the AU and the United Nations for each African country, Nigeria inclusive, that they should now, for over the next decade, what we should strive to address as far as inclusive governance is concerned is peaceful coexistence and economic development. Inequalities will be addressed. The effect of climate change, Lake Chad is shrinking and is causing farmer herders conflict. It's affecting, the relationship between the South and the North. Health pandemics, what coronavirus, monkeypox, and all the pauses have done to us in Nigeria. And enhance regional cooperation. We cannot do it alone, because what happens to country A will affect country B and C, as well as ensure the full effective participation in both the economic and political system of group that have historically been marginalized. We mentioned them. That each country must reflect upon its own governance and challenges and engage in robust national dialogue. We have to continue to talk. When we talk about federal system, where we have heterogeneous people, we continue to dialogue. And what should be the issue to dialogue on? Two critical questions. So we continue to live together? If yes, on what conditions? We should. Even when you are with your wife and children, you talk so as to manage your relationship, for the betterment of every member of the family. Not talk of a state that is composed of different type of people. And also, they are also, they have suggested that the African countries should engage in process-driven constitution making or reform to produce an agreed upon governing process characterized by the separation of powers with effective checks and balances, including a robust and politically active society, an independent judiciary, and a viable, free, and independent press. Now, the process must be the one that we allow the constitution to be designed and adopted, in such a way that people participate and every stakeholder is included, to allow them to come up with constitutional principles that they actually design for themselves, and for them to ratify, not the one that is being made on their behalf, and they are now telling the whole world that they are the one that have made the constitution. And they should engage national dialogue to help their citizens understand and better appreciate the importance of the constitution to governance generally and the protection of human rights in particular. Through this process, citizens can determine how to strengthen their national constitutions. Because even in the US, they have amendments. It's not the matter of because it's favoring me, it's favoring others, and it's not favoring me, we should not do that, we should not do this. We should consider the national interest above our private and individual interest. Thank you for your attention, and I'm very sorry for taking your time.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, for that insightful presentation. While we wait for our next speaker, because the next session will be starting soon, and while we wait for Professor Aiyede to join us, we're going to be taking a couple of questions. So if you have a question, you can either drop your question in the comment box, or you can unmute to speak. Mr. Salahu, I can see that you are raising your hand. Can you please ask your question?
Good morning, everybody. Once again.
Good morning.
Hello. Now, one, I want to first thank our dear Egbon, our lecturer, Dr. Lafenwa, for that presentation. In fact, from the whole presentation, one may not even say, one will be asking him said that when will I ask the question? But nevertheless, as a student, we must have way to build our sense of belonging. Now, sir, I want to ask questions from the perspective of what we can call one of the causes of this inclusive government we have said. From my own understanding, I believe that in Nigeria, I want to take Nigeria as a case study. The inadequate inclusion, I want to use the word inadequate, inclusive government, has affected the administration and the development of Nigeria as we have also seen. But anytime we raise this question of, let me borrow your word, bad governance, they normally attach it to the lack of political will to drive the system. I now want to ask, what are those ingredients or indices of a political will to provide inclusive government that Nigeria is lacking? That is
ingredient of what? Sorry, please.
Ingredient of political will. The political will.
Okay. Political will, yes.
Valid. That is number one. Then number two, Nigeria has a multi-phase, the word diverse, where there are diverse ethnic groups. If you look at this upcoming 2003 election now, ethnicity has surfaced in the sense that the three dominant political parties is having ethnic identity. The North, the South, and that of the Southwest and the Southeast, which is you can say this is the product of what happened during the issue of a McCarthy constitution that led to the downfall of that McCarthy constitution, where we were having three political parties then that were dominantly showcasing the identity of the ethnic group. So as we have it here now, are we not even taking a step back to the replication of what happened during that time as a country, as an independent country this time around? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Before Dr. would respond to the question, we would like to take all the questions at once. So if you have any other questions or any other question for you can put the question in the chat box, or you can simply unmute your mic to speak. And while we wait for that, I actually have a question that I would like to ask. It appears that when we talk about inclusive governance in Nigeria, one of the major challenges is that it has always not been in the interest of the elites. The elites have always wanted to keep the people as far away from governance as possible. So how do we address the issue? How do we best address this issue of the Nigerian elites trying to cage the people, trying to put them away from governance processes? So,
Thank you.
Mr. Afis, please, you can ask your question.
Okay, my question is kind of similar to what you just asked now, but mine is more or less like empirical question. Thank you, Doctor, for your lecture. My
Thank you
question
very much.
is, considering the fundamental objective of Nigerian state, which you've highlighted in the course of your lecture, and we've seen the languages and the response of Nigerian political elites when it's come to inclusive governance. Just a week ago, a petition was sent from the United States to represent the people of Tiv in Benue State in order to express their grievances in the House of Representatives. And the bill was immediately rejected by the deputy, one of the officers presiding over the House, without even considering the constitutional provision that addressed the position of Nigerian in diaspora. And the response to that question was, they cannot take a petition from Nigerian in diaspora speaking on security issues in Nigeria. Now, my question is, if we are to have inclusive governance and Nigerians are to participate in democratic processes, policy formulation and implementation, and the political elite seems not to share the same ideology when it comes to this discourse, then how best do we hold these people accountable to ensure that we have this inclusive governance? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I respond now?
Very soon, sir. What
Okay.
I'd like to know if we have any other questions. Do we have any other question? Okay, in the absence of question, you can respond, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start with the question talking about political will. Political will is to me is a vague concept, in the sense that when you try to conceptualize it, you see that it's either you are biased depending on where you belong to. When a politician defines political will, they will tell you, they are putting their best. They have done the best they could do. But you will see it in their commitment. And also you see it in the process of making their policy, and also in the outcomes. The ingredients of political commitment supposed to be something that is derived from the people. And we're supposed to, actualize that when we are voting for these people. Somebody who has nothing to do with providing electricity will be telling you, when I get there, I will give you 24/7 electricity. And foolishly we go and vote for that person. How can the councillor be telling you he will increase your wage? Is it in the purview of the councillors to do that? Our politicians, that what is driving them in governance is their private interest, which is being colored under what? Public interest. And that is why they don't demonstrate political will or political or commitment, show commitment when it comes to implementation of policies that will favor the people. So we get that right, because you are not expecting somebody who have invested almost 2 billion to get into an office to go and demonstrate political commitment or will to do what will favor you. And that's why we need to restructure. We need to have a constitution that will make all those fundamental objectives justiciable, that we can take them to court. Look at what Buhari's promised us in 2015, 2019. Which of them, can you tell me, they have demonstrated political will to solve the problem that they have demonstrated political will to solve? Then, when it comes, to the issue of the politician caging the masses, it is the problem of the system. I'm telling you, the system that we adopted right from independence era is really affecting us. It is a system that does not want input from the people, apart from support. No demand. They don't want you to, put pressure on them, but they want support from you. Even that is why when there is a military takeover, 1 year they will try to do something to garner legitimacy. After that, they begin to go that way. How can we break that a barrier? One, by continuing to what? Create awareness about the problem that is facing Nigerians, facing us, and mobilize the people of the same mind to address this issue. Enough is enough of talking about, we students from University of Ibadan, students from the protest we did on Tuesday, the labor union, students almost, they were almost fighting one another. Maybe because they have given them something. And you see, in fact, some of those people who participated in the protest, they were taking selfie, gathering themselves together and taking their selfie. Somebody now said, can you be in the forefront and be taking selfie? That is the problem that we have. We continue to have leaders that have no clue about what we call good governance. And that is why we always talk about bad governance, because we, the people, do not do the right thing at the right time. Now, election is coming now. Some will be caged by 2,000 naira. Some will continue in that, slave camp, because of 5,000 naira. Some will be taken because of 100,000 naira. So these are some of the things even if you collect money, if they give you money and you refuse, and your party, is not in power, don't forget the fact that that is it for today. Tomorrow may change, and people will be looking for you if you demonstrate your integrity. And can you remind me the third question, please? Sorry. Hello?
The third question was about the resistance of the House of Representatives as regards to petition that was sent.
Petition, okay, that was sent by the UN. When it comes to issues that affect the interests of the so-called political elite, they will never, or they want to jeopardize their interest, they will never want to do that. That's why people were talking about restructuring. We have to put pressure as civil society group, as student group, as women group, all those marginalized groups. If you continue to put pressure, that's why I'm surprised that people have shifted from they are calling for restructuring now to prepare for election. Can we conduct election with this kind of system and we still we get a different result? I will tell you no. We put pressure on them to do the right thing by restructuring the system in such a way that people can be made accountable and they can be punished if they are found wanting. We should not stop. By rejecting it that the National Assembly is not a signal that that's the end of that issue. They can still continue to mount pressure from outside. We have seen some people, some government being toppled, being displaced from outside. So we should not continue to keep quiet because those people can never, garner political will or commitment to restructure the system. And that is why I will still go with what Afe Babalola said. Some people say that, it's not possible. There is nothing impossible in this world. That let us allow these, politicians to end their tenure. After that, don't let us run into election like we did in 1999. We didn't resolve the issue of constitutional issues, the legal issue of the legal framework upon which we are going to build our democracy. We rush into it, and now we are facing the problem. Now we have failed for over 23 years now. Should we continue to want to do the same thing in the same way and expect different results? No. Let us continue to put pressure. Let involve more than ever before. That's why I encourage the organizer of this program to continue. Let's start the dialogue from now. People may not join us now. I'm telling you, very soon, some people will join. And when we get, wherever we get to, we will continue to talk about, what we are discussing here. And let us, see. Let's just continue to convince so many people so that when we have the same interest and we can mobilize ourselves, it's a matter of time. All those things we are talking about, we are going to, or where we are moving to, we will get there. So thank you very much for those beautiful questions that you have asked. And I want to thank the organizer again. You have done a very good work, and I pray that God will continue to be with you. Thank you very much.
Amen, sir. Thank you very much for that beautiful presentation. We hope to continue to engage with you in the future. We are confident that when next we call upon you, you would be available.
Yes.
So without wasting much of our time, we'll be moving on to the next segment of this conference. We'll be moving to the fourth and final session, and the session will be presented by Professor Remi, the head of department of the Department of Political Science, University of Ibadan. And before he starts his presentation, I'm going to call on Mr. Daniel Adiola, who will be reading the citation of our presenter, and afterwards we would move into the presentation proper. Daniel, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll be reading the citation of Professor Emmanuel Remi Aiyede. Emmanuel Remi Aiyede is a professor of political institutions, governance, and public policy at the Department of Political Science, University of Ibadan. He's a fellow of the Pan-African Scientific Research Council and the current head department of political science, a former sub-dean, faculty of the social sciences, and a former coordinator of the leadership and governance program from 2010 to 2014. Center for Sustainable Development, University of Ibadan. He was also a visiting scholar at the Electoral Institute, Independent National Electoral Commission, Abuja, 2016 to 2017. Visiting fellow at the Transregional Center for Democratic Studies, CCDS, New School University, New York, 2000, and a fellow at the Governance Unit think tank in Ibadan in 1990 to 2004. Professor Aiyede, who holds a PhD degree in political science from the University of Ibadan, is an alumnus of the Fulbright study of the United States Institute of National Security Policy after 9/11, University of Delaware, 2009, Executive Education Program on Governance at the Albert Kennedy School, 2008, and the Partnership for African and Social Governance Research, ApexGuide, training program on pedagogical methods for teaching public policy and EKSD development, Nairobi, 2000 to 2014. He taught at the University of Lagos before joining the University of Ibadan in 2005. He has experience in several universities within and outside Africa as visiting lecturer. He has been on the editorial board of the Nigerian oldest surviving newspaper, the New Nigerian Tribune, since 2008. He contributes to public discourse in the Nigerian domestic and foreign media. His research work connects public policy, institutional reforms, and democratic institution building. Maintaining close contact with the policy process, he has participated in building the governance and policy capacities of national and state executive officials and legislatures in Nigeria. He has been involved with PASGA in promoting innovative pedagogy in higher education in Africa. He was a part of the team that developed the curriculum for the Masters of Research and Public Policy and a PhD program in public policy, which currently run in universities across Africa in 2020. His recent publications include Remi Aiyede and O.M. Quadri 2002, Public Evaluation in African, in Gideon Onyangon, Routledge Book of Public Policy in Africa, London. Routledge, Taylor and Francis, page 164 to 1676. Nicholas Awoti and Remi Aiyede, 2017 Politics, Public Policy and Social Protection in Africa. Evidence from Cash Transfer Program, London, Routledge. His article, The Dynamics of Civil Society in the Democratization Process in Nigeria, Canadian Journal of African Studies, 2003, won a 2003 medal in the World Prize for Outstanding Research in Development of the Global Development Network, GDN. I present to you Professor Remi Aiyede as he take over our next session. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
Morning, sir.
Morning, sir.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be part of this discussion. I was here yesterday and listened to the presentation by Femi Adenitan, something, who was a student here in the Faculty of Law. I remember in those days when he was involved with a number of activities, I used to write a reference for him. And I was also there to listen to part of Professor Pogosin's presentation, but unfortunately, I had to leave. And then this morning, I had to rush for my program at the 32 FM studio before coming here. That's why I was a little bit late, only able to listen to the closing remark of Dr. Lafenwa. I have an idea what I wanted to talk about, and it was supposed to be just for me to share a particular slide. I'll try to see if I can put it up, which is a picture that depicts your idea that I want to talk about, which is breaking the barriers to inclusive governance, the role of responsible citizenship in inclusive governance. I think something is missing in this title, but I have my presentation broken down into a number of sessions, which I'm going to be talking about accordingly. I will look first at the entire issue of inclusive governance and how it is problematized in the context of Nigeria, because although Nigeria is not written on the topic, from the discussion so far, apparently, to me, the focus is on Nigeria. And to do that, I'll begin by looking at how the issue of inclusion is currently being debated in the country. And one of the departing points that one can take off from will be the current discussion of the Muslim ticket for the vice presidency of Nigeria, and the whole idea that is part of a systematic program of disempowering and underrepresenting the Christian group within the Nigerian political space. And there has been a lot of reaction and counter-reaction in that regard. If you want to see my take on that, I think I'll put a link there. There's a recent article that I wrote, which was published in the Cable and in Intervention and a few other media outlets. It's titled Beyond Elite Political Consensus or Political Settlement between individual political ambition and elite political settlement, something like that. I'll put the link and then we can look at it. But it's actually my take on the current debate within an institutionalist perspective. But essentially, it's about the idea of inclusion and the barriers that we need to cross. And now we have attempted to cross it in the past. So what I'm going to look at first, I'll look at the notion of barriers to inclusive governance. What does that really mean? What are the barriers and how can we break them? Then secondly, I'm going to look at the idea of responsible citizenship. What is citizenship? And how does that link to the idea of breaking the barriers of inclusive governance? And then, of course, I will draw some conclusions from the empirical situation in Nigeria and what can be done, to address that. First and foremost, what is inclusive governance? If we talk about inclusive governance, we are talking in terms of a governance arrangement in which we recognize our diversity, which means diversity is very central to the question of inclusion. Because if there are no differences, if there are no variation in the possibilities of representation, we won't be talking about inclusive governance. Inclusive governance, therefore, refers to a situation where the diverse groups, the diverse categories of our society is made to to have a sense of belonging in the way governance is conducted, both in terms of representation in the offices and office of the state, and also in terms of enjoying what some people call the dividends of democracy, or what we call the services, that comes from the operation of the state. So we don't have a situation where the government is made up of only Muslims, for instance, or only Christians, or mostly Christians, or very few Muslims. And then we can look at that again in terms of the broader categories of ethnicity, terms of the various ethnic groups. And then we also look at that in terms of geopolitics, in terms of North versus South of the geopolitical zone, and so on and so forth. So that's the understanding of diversity and then inclusion. Now, what is responsible for the question of exclusive governance or lack of inclusion? We'll start first by looking at it. Sometimes it is historical in a country like Nigeria that is a colonial product. The process of colonialism accounts for a significant part of the way the state is constituted. So you have diversity of ethnic groups brought together to form one country. Secondly, the way these groups are brought together varies across time, and the manner in which they are incorporated into the governance structure of the colonial system also vary, and this is brought on into the post-colonial state. So you have a situation where the northern part of the country was largely walled off the influence of Western education, and you have the missionaries allowed to operate in most of the southern parts of the country, and therefore were exposed to Western education early, in colonial rule. And as a result of that, by the time we are approaching independence, a significant number of people were already not just graduate from secondary education, secondary schools, but even from universities, including postgraduate. Some of them have even gone overseas. So we have families that have generations already of graduates in higher education within the South. But in the North, one could count the number of people who have graduated from secondary school at the point of independence. And that created what we call some kind of group inequality, historical inequality. That means that there was some kind of discrimination, whether intentional or unintentional, between the North and South in terms of access to Western education. Now, even in the South and in other places where there was access to Western education, it was not even, because it depends on where the missionaries landed, in places like Lagos, in Benin City, in Abeokuta. And you can name a few places like Calabar. You find that the level of education in those places are relatively higher and better than in other places where Western education did not go deep into those communities. So that then means that there's kind of unlevel playing field due to this structural and historical problem. But more than that, inclusiveness is also, exclusion is also created by economic situations. Some people are also privileged to come from well-endowed families with high income. Others are from very low income. And if you put them on the table and say, go and compete, you have this problem where people cannot compete effectively because they are already disadvantaged from the families they come from the ethnic group they come from, or from the particular locality that they come from. And even over time at the individual level, you also still find a situation where poverty has increased over time. As we have said, Nigeria has become the poverty capital of the world. And people who are born into poverty tend to have this vicious circle of being transferring their own poverty to their children. And if you don't really do anything to break that barrier, they will never really come out of that poverty situation. And that's where the whole idea of breaking the barrier comes. The question is, what kind of policies have been adopted to address this kind of situation? This time around, of course, we will recognize the fact that it is not a situation that is peculiar to Nigeria. It's something you find all over the world. The way this, what we call group inequality occurs may vary, but they are permanent, they are visible or strong in many countries of the world. If you go to India, for instance, they had their case system that has created this kind of problem. If you go to the United States, the history of slavery and then the various ways through which people migrated into the United States to form the United States creates that kind of problem. And all over the world, it's difficult to get any society where inclusion is not a challenge. And a very vital part of this historical barrier is also the gender dimension, which we often talk about. And you'll find that women have been discriminated against for centuries in Europe, for instance. Until 1946, women did not have the right to vote in places like Britain. So you'll find that this whole question of exclusion, it's something that virtually all countries have to deal with. So the question then is, how have this problem of exclusion, or if you like, arising from what we call inequalities or inequities. Some people, in fact, if you want to look at it at the group level, we describe it as horizontal inequality. Now, the whole question of exclusion and the quest for removing the barriers of to inclusion is really because it has implications for stability, for peace, for conflict, and for social stability. In fact, there is a whole research that has looked into the causes of inequality, horizontal inequality, exclusion in governance, and the means through which all of this can be addressed. I think recently we did a paper, myself and Professor Aiyede, on horizontal ethnicity, horizontal inequality, and social development in Africa, where some of these challenges are carefully identified and outlined. And one of the studies is really that in many countries in Africa, the persistence of conflict and the inability to establish stability is likely accounted for by the presence of horizontal inequality, group inequality, in terms of representation in governance, in terms of economic representation, and in terms of poverty and social inequality. So when you put all of this together, they say they may not necessarily lead to war or conflict, but their exploitation often leads to conflict. In fact, take for instance, they look at some of the studies look at a number of countries, and one of the things we find is that the countries that have very high diversity do not necessarily experience instability and conflict. We also find that the most homogeneous societies also are not necessarily prone to conflict. There is a difference, there is a variable that makes a difference. That is perception of the causes of inequality. In other words, perception of what constitute barriers to inclusive governance is often responsible. In fact, they said there are sometimes what are caused by those who are even overrepresented in government. But because they are made to believe that they are underrepresented, they can be so angry that they provoke conflict. So perception matters in terms of issues of inclusion, of exclusion of underrepresentation and so on and so forth. And that's why what is presented in the media, what is presented can be very critical. So perception matters when it comes to issues of inclusion. And when it also comes to breaking the barriers to inclusion, we must take that into account. And that's why citizenship, or for that matter, responsible citizenship, is very crucial. Again, because when we talk about citizenship, we are talking about citizenship as a form of identity. We are talking about citizenship as a legal status. We are talking about citizenship as some form of agency, political intervention, capacity to cause change or to cause change to happen. Now, when we talk about responsible citizenship, it brings even some additional complications to it. In Nigeria, of course, we have problems with citizenship because, again, we have multiple layers of citizenship, or sometimes we describe as bifurcated citizenship. What we refer to as there's a general citizenship that is guaranteed by law, which means we are all citizens as long as we are born into Nigeria, we are either married or we register or we naturalize. But that's not sufficient. We also have in this citizenship that is traced to what we call indigeneity, that somebody's ancestry is found to be located somewhere that is identified in a state in Nigeria. And if you have legal citizenship, but you are not indigenous to a particular community, if you live in that state for many years, you pay your tax there, do whatever you want to do there, people still think that you're not part of that state. And it's only recently now, with all this banditry and all of that, governors are beginning to take residency importantly. Recently, the Edo State government has announced that there's going to be a resident permit. There's going to be some kind of identification for people who are residents of a particular state. And in trying to address those kind of security challenges, I think we will begin, it's a pathway towards trying to define what citizenship should look like, so that we can actually know beyond indigeneity and settler. We know that people can cause trouble if you don't try to identify them, locate them. Depending on how it is handled, we might in fact be going towards trying to identify a fundamental problem associated with citizenship. But much more than that, what it means is also that it is citizens who become governors, citizens who become leaders in various layers. And if they are irresponsible as citizens, they can't just suddenly become responsible when they are leaders. And the tragedy of this question of responsible citizenship is with us. We have people in government, they manage the resources of their state or their locality as if the resources are supposed to be spent on people who are not related to them. So you have state governors who will take the money of the state and go on a jamboree. You are contesting for a presidential seat, you take the resources of the state, you are contributing 2 million, 300 million to the cost of your presidency when pensioners in your state have not been paid. So they are handling the state as if they are not part of the state. People living in those states are not members of their own community, which creates all kinds of challenges. So responsibility is crucial, not just for inclusive governance, but also for meaningful consolidation of the state system, whether at the national level, at the state level, or at the local government level. So we begin to see the problems of irresponsibility when people occupy those offices. But interestingly, the responsibility started with them as ordinary citizens. And irresponsible citizens have a particular attitude towards governance. They don't think that the common good is important. They are only concerned and driven by their own self-interest. If it doesn't work well for them, everybody else could die. It doesn't really matter. And that's why we talk about leaders who are insensitive, to the problems that we have. And that's why sometimes when things go wrong, somewhere that we think is not part of our, it's not in our part of Nigeria, we think it doesn't matter. Until when the thing comes close, that's when we begin to scream. All these are part of characteristics of irresponsible citizenship, because as responsible citizens, we must know that there are two dimensions to citizenship. There's the vertical citizenship, which is the relationship between the citizen and the government. and the state. And then, of course, there's also the relationship among citizens, which is the horizontal citizens. So if something bad happens to your neighbor, because the armed robbers are not knocking on your door, you can just continue to sleep. It doesn't really matter. If they rob everybody and don't rob you, you're fine. That kind of attitude is also part of irresponsible citizenship. When people who don't care about their neighbors, who don't care about other citizens, find themselves in the seats of power, the tendency is that they are likely to promote exclusion within governance. Now, that's dealing with some of those issues at the theoretical level and discussing how they manifest in terms of empirical political theory. But in practical terms, there are actually barriers to inclusion. For instance, if people are disempowered, if you belong to the poverty class, chances are, one of the things I used to tell my students in class is that we are all privileged, those of us who are in the university. Some of them keep crying, oh, we can't pay school fees, it's difficult, or we don't want to, we can't live exactly the same way we want to live. But if you look at the percentage of Nigerians in the university and those who are unable to even think or dream about going to the universities, you know that being in the university itself shows that you are elevated, at least to some level, within the order of things, because we have just about 550,000 undergraduates in the entire country. So, I mean, how many, and the country has over 200 million people, and those 200, and over 50% of those 200 people are below, are young people. And if we have only 550,000 in probably say about 100 or 70 million young people who are supposed to be in the university, you see the gap that we are talking about. So yes, some people are already disadvantaged. And to these days, you also have increasing disparity between those who go to public schools, secondary schools, primary schools, and go to private secondary or primary schools. And so when you get to the university, you'll find that, yeah, a lot of people who are in the university are privileged to have attended some private schools, and therefore are better positioned to pass JAM, or to, especially if you come to our own university here, where admission is strictly on merit. The only way you will be lucky to enter into the system is to go through the distance learning system, which is a little bit much more liberal than the regular student. So to get into the University of Ibadan, for instance, well, if you are disadvantaged by your primary and secondary school education, it's going to be a tall order. You must be exceptionally gifted to be able to do so. So these are barriers to inclusion. So inclusion has to do with different levels: economic access, political access, and then social access. So if you don't have access to education, it's a big barrier for you. And then, of course, there's also the question of what kind of job you do, what chances of upward mobility do you have in society. If, for instance, it is said that, oh, we want to do not too young to run, we bring down the age of those who can contest, that's fine. But you will soon find that it's not just about the age. You must have a war chest to be able to do so. And that's why we have not too young to run bill, but we have ended up with aspirants who are 75 years, 70 years and above for the presidency, because the kind of war chest you need to build to be able to, even vie for those offices is not a joking matter. And so you see in the APC, for instance, people have asked to produce 100 million, just to show interest in a primaries for which you don't have a guarantee of success. Now, you know what that 100 million would do if you put it into a department or any department at all, not to talk of if you put it into a social science or art department, what miracle is likely to be done if the money is used effectively. Then, of course, you also talk about representation, which is often what people look at when we talk about politics. But of course, we talk about governance, it's more embracing. So if we talk about the political dimension, for instance, we say, okay, it's a Muslim ticket. So why a Muslim ticket? Then we say, okay, there's federal character principles that strive to make sure that everyone is included. Why, after so many years of federal character principle, we are still having a problem where the appointments are largely skewed in favor of the president's men. And if you go to, I mean, nepotism all over the place, and so on and so forth. And so people feel excluded. They think they don't have access, and they say, look, if we have our own state, we're likely to do better than this system where some group are perpetually dominated. I mean, you hear cries of marginalization, you hear cries of less, self-determination, let's restructure the country, and so on and so forth. All of this as a result of, the feeling, the perception of exclusion from governance. Now, in terms of measures that have been taken, of course, I've referred to the federal character principle. In 1994-95 conference under Abacha, we had the geopolitical zone, and then we also have the rotation, and then, of course, the zoning principles. All of these are designed to address issues of political exclusion. And we've seen the challenges associated with that, because having a quota system creates its own problem. And then you also hear about the Beijing affirmative action principle, which is also part of something close to federal character, that the quota should be given to women, don't say 30% or so, and it should be guaranteed. But you can see what has also happened with the practice in Nigeria. Now, in terms of economic exclusion, there are all kinds of measures that have been put in place. The government talks about, these days all over the world, not only in Nigeria, they talk about cash transfers. They say there are some people who, no matter how easy education is, even if you make it free, their children can't go to school because they have to work in order to be able to feed themselves. And we say, okay, give their parents money and ask them to release the children to go to school so they can be in school, or introduce feeding programs so that when they are away from home, they don't have to depend on their parents to get food to eat. So you provide those food. So all kinds of measures that you see across. And then, of course, there are practical measures to ensure that you extend some of educational facilities to different communities, ensure they have good classrooms, they have teachers, they have all of those things. And then you also talk about extending social amenities to the nooks and crannies of society, whether it's water, health facilities. And today in Nigeria, we talk about primary health care being in every ward within the local government and so on. So these are measures that are put in place, to break the barriers to inclusion, because if people are not empowered, first and foremost, they don't have a voice. 2, they can't fight discrimination. 3, they can't express themselves, and they can't participate in the political life of community. So the dimension towards breaking barrier to inclusion is multiple. And then you also find that one very important barrier is also the kind of governance system that you practice, especially the electoral system. And so we have all kinds of changes that have gone on in the electoral system for a while. And the latest, of course, is the direct transmission of results to through the from the polling unit directly to the portal of INEC, to avoid the capacity of strong people within the political parties to intervene between, when the results are collated at the polling units and when they go to the collation center before they get to the state or national level. There are all kinds of manipulation by those who have means. And today now we are talking about vote buying, because it's now difficult for strong men of the political parties to manipulate and write results regardless of what is coming from the polling unit. So you can see that the barriers to inclusion is, the problem of inclusion, first and foremost, is complex and complicated. It has political dimension, it has economic dimensions, it has social dimension. And you can look at each of these dimensions in great detail. Then secondly, we also see that there are measures taken to address these barriers at the political, economic, and social level. And we see that government is very central to all of this, from affirmative action to social assistance program to the use of quota system and then of course your idea of even spread of developmental programs and initiatives across. And then we also notice that this inclusion has different dimensions, from gender to individual social inequality to group inequality. So it's a whole complicated measures. And that these measures, of course, can be written down, can be adopted from anywhere from all over the world, but without responsible citizenship, we have them on paper. In their implementation, people ignore them. And so you have a situation where federal character principle is very clear. The president does just the minimum. He says every state must have a minister. Once they have a minister, it's now time for you to have political appointee. You say it's on anything you like, you will do. That what is important to you is competency or giving results. And then you put people from all one dimension of the country in political office. At the end of the day, there are no results. And then you argue that you are not breaking any law. Now, that is the cross of responsibility as far as I'm concerned. And you find those kind of arguments even in the universities. We have not just the rules that make specific demands of those in office, but that rule is supposed to define a particular culture or tradition of governance, which is supposed to influence decisions that are made regarding inclusion in other spheres. So you don't need to have another law that says if you are to appoint senior special assistant to the governor, president or the governor, you must spread it across the state. You don't need it. Once the law has already said, okay, if you want a minister, you must take one from it. It means that if you are also appointing people, you must try to make sure that you also reflect the federal character. But people will argue that it is not in the law. You are not breaking any law, as if law is the beginning and end of life. Law is usually the minimum. The same thing we have in the university. You want to appoint a vice chancellor, we say, okay, somebody has met all the criteria. Even criteria that are not existing in the rule is the basis on which people are then mobilized. And in doing that mobilization, nothing is heard about the purpose of the university, the purpose of the state, the essence of governance. How can our appointments, our mobilization lead to the achievement of the purposes of the state, the purposes of the university? It's only when you have responsible citizenship that you can do that. People will say it's not only that they've not broken the law, they also, as long as they are not caught, they think that they are doing fine. I remember when I was in the article I wrote on in the cable that I was talking about, I was making the argument that look at the basis of the elite settlement of 1994, 1995. The whole idea is that the annulment of the June 12, 1993 election demonstrated that some people have a stronger strength, power within the political process, and they seem to want to monopolize power at the national level. And then we say, look, let's use this principle. At first, they say, okay, it should be rotated among the 6 geopolitical zones. Until 1994-95, there's nothing like geopolitical zones in Nigeria. And the idea is that, okay, if it rotates between the north and south, when it comes to the north, they rotate among the 6 geopolitical zones. When it comes to the south, it rotate among the 3 geopolitical zones. And suddenly somebody says, it is his ambition to be president. So when it comes to the south, let it be survival of the fittest. If you have enough money, come to APC primary and buy as many votes as you can. And if you don't have enough money, that's your business. It has belonged to the South. We don't need to microzone it to anywhere. But if you look at the idea is that the South have had it, the Southwest have had it. It's the Southeast that have not had it. Now, somebody was telling me at an argument, I say, if they really want it so badly, they should have raised enough money to be able to do that. I say, tell me one state in the Southeast that can muzzle, that a governor can steal to stupor and get the kind of money that somebody from Lagos would get. Or look at the South and tell me any state in the Southeast that can muster the kind of money you can get from Rivers State. It is not accidental that those in APC and PDP who are trying to undermine those principles are money bags. And where they come from determine a lot about how much money they are being able to muster. So if you say survival of the fittest, survival of the fittest sometimes go against the rule of natural justice. And that's why the rule of law is not designed for strong people. The basis of institutions and rule of law is to take care of the weak in society. And if you want to understand that, go back to John Rawls' theory of justice. The argument about the social contract, that the essence of social contract is to take care of the weak. Because the strong can muscle anybody out of the way and get his way. So anybody who belongs to a disadvantaged group should not promote any way of undermining the rule of law, because it is through law, through institutions, through traditions and cultural practices that society demonstrates its respect for inclusive governance. But if you say we should allow the principle of the survival of the fittest to rule and undermine and disregard institutions when it is not favorable to the strong, then the time will come, because great strength is not permanent. Those who are strong today will not be those who will be strong tomorrow. And what happens if you are, because in 1993, there was no money that could recover the mandate back to Abiola, in spite of the fact that he has wealth and resources. And we learned from that mistake, because the first time he tried to muzzle his way through, they told him that the presidency is not for the highest bidder in 1983. And then he went back and played his politics. He had resources. He went through the country. He managed even Muslim ticket at that time, because he was campaigning on the basis of farewell, bye-bye to poverty, of inclusion, of concern for ordinary people. He had his way. Even then, it was not sufficient. Those who had more strength to win the political system denied him of an electoral victory that he was supposed to have legitimately earned. By 1994-95, we said, no, this thing cannot continue. They introduced the power shift principle and the rotation principle. And regardless of what Obasanjo had, whether he had money or not, they brought him from prison and said, this thing must go to. Nobody said, let us, yes, if you go to the Southwest, since they have been disadvantaged. But even then, if they don't have anybody who is strong enough to take over power, that's their business. No, even the powerful North recognize that if they don't bend over backwards to accommodate the Southwest, there will be trouble. And so we have this principle. Now they've thrown all the principles. Even the PDP that had the principle in its constitution, throw away that principle, and Atiku is emerging as the presidential candidate. So how do you go from here? Because what they are telling us is that until we get to another crisis principle point, then we now go back again to the drawing board, when we already have a fine principle that says, let these things go around. And that's why the whole idea of zoning, the whole idea, which is a form of federal character, a form of affirmative action, is very important. Now, these principles, of course, have their own downside. I mean, if you look at the implementation of the federal character principle, for instance, some people will say, how is it that there's reverse discrimination? Because that's what affirmative action promote the disadvantaged, the weak. So if you think that it is not important, check all over the world, even in the United States, even in Canada, they try all of this. In Malaysia, in India, because you need to, allow people to have access. But in doing that, we have to be very careful about how we design those policies and how we implement them. But what you find is that such fine policies in Nigeria have been abused. Federal character does not mean that there should be no merit. It is not antithetical to merit. But in Nigeria, you find that it seems as if once you say federal character, you should throw away merit. Then secondly, in many places, some of these principles are time-bound. What they call, they have what we call sunset principles, such that after we say, okay, we are going to use this rotation principle for a particular period of time. So if every part of the country has had access to this governmental position, we can again, let's go back to merit and then see how it works out. But many of these, our own federal character principle, rotation principle, zoning principle, don't have sunset clauses. So that's why it looks as if it's going to be there forever. And people who don't benefit from it tend to try to undermine it. And those who have ambition also tend to manipulate it, to suit their own ambition. So in other words, breaking the barriers of inclusion barriers to inclusive governance is a very challenging thing. The policy prescriptions are available. Many of them have been practiced in Nigeria, but designing them appropriately, implementing them with responsibility is actually what where we suffer a great deal of deficit. And then we're at a crossroad where exclusion has increased because one, poverty has increased, and because of that, commitment to the government has dwindled. Three, those who are in government, especially in the last 8 years, have not paid attention to political inclusion in a very serious and systematic manner, and therefore they have deepened the feeling of exclusion within the governance system. It's as if we don't have rotation principle. It's as if we don't have power shift principle. It's as if we don't have federal character principle. Yet all of those things are there. And so when it comes to exclusion, you can see even what has happened with the educational system. I was thinking that probably they will create centers where government people will live, and they import intelligence and police and soldiers to guard them so that they will be free from the insecurity that we suffer, just as their children have access to foreign universities as they've shut down our own universities. But they have seen that exclusive practices will do nobody no good in the long run. At the end of the day, all the, what do we call them, the apparatus of police that they, personalize. They have all kinds of military escorts and all of that. They've seen now that the security situation has worsened. They cannot escape. Even the president has been threatened that he will be kidnapped, including the governor. That's the tragedy of disregard for inclusion. Then go to the educational sector when we talk about inclusion. Of course, we also see that the number of people whose children are in public university quite outnumber those who are in private universities. And you also find that significant amount of Nigerians, in fact, the so-called privileged Nigerians, can sponsor their children education abroad. And so the NLC and other unions have said, if they don't have interest in promoting public higher education, they are also going to join in supporting, in solidarity with the academic staff. So in other words, Nigeria is not really short of measures to promote inclusive governance. We also see, they said they have school feeding program. They talk about over 238 billion in those programs. You ask yourself, where are the children? Where is the food? What is the quality of food they are giving to those children? And what is the situation of the school feeding program? They also talk about cash transfer. During the lockdown, we saw them, the amount of money they were. Yes, some people got it. The question is, there's no accountability. Tell us how many people have benefited. Demonstrate to us where those people are to be found and all of that. But accountability is very low. So you can't break the barriers of inclusive governance without responsible citizenship. And responsible citizenship that we are talking about is about people who are concerned about one another, that citizens, even before they become governors, before they become members of the National Assembly, recognize the fact that we have a common problem, we have a common fate, and that within the state system, whether as a container of security, but also as a means of service provisioning, we must recognize that the welfare of others is part of our own individual welfare. With that kind of mindset, when we are in government, then of course, we recognize that the purpose of government is not for self-aggrandizement, it's not for us and our families alone, it's for public service, so that we can enjoy social stability, we can enjoy peace, we can enjoy progress, and prosperity will be shared. It's only under this condition of inclusive governance that we can achieve the kind of country that we all desire. And this has been clearly stipulated in part 2 of the Constitution, which is the directive principle of state policy. So until we have responsible citizenship, citizens becoming governors and becoming president, occupying the legislative houses and the judicial part of the government, we are not likely to enjoy inclusive governance. And without inclusive governance, I tell you, we will continue to experience the kind of problems that we have, because social dislocation, poverty, underrepresentation, perception of discrimination and marginalization will breed crime, will breed the delegitimization of the state, and then we ultimately lead to conflict and crisis in governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for that beautiful presentation. It was very insightful. I'll call on Mr. Daniel Adiola to please take over the question and answer session. Mr. Daniel. So while we wait for Daniel, please, if you have any question, okay, Mr. Barrister Femi, you can proceed with your question. Barrister Femi.
Hello, Prof. Thank you very much for that insightful presentation. It was very eye-opening. However, I just want to ask 1 or 2 questions, just in follow-up to your presentation. You talked about, I think, the farmer elders and the conflicts in particularly the Middle Belt. I was just wondering if, can we say it's a problem of inclusion, in the sense that how the problem all started, looking at it from the pastoralists and the farmers, and though there are some justifications for other factors, right, which we can refer to as big banditry and other things, but looking at the problem, looking at it from the structural angle of how the conflict started itself, can you refer to that as a problem of inclusion? Maybe the pastoralists were not properly included in terms of redesigning of the solution whenever it comes to like providing solution to the clashes, often clashes that they do have. And if we see it's the problem of inclusion, what do you think we should do differently, or the government can do differently in addressing the issue of the farmer elders conflict in a more a novel way, a new thing that you think can be adopted now? Thank you.
Please, if you have any question, you can put in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. Mr. Martin, you can ask a question. Mr. Martin, you can mute your mic and ask a question, please.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good afternoon all.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Thank you, Professor Remi Aiyede, my teacher. That was mind-blowing, that was explosive. However, I think this is important. This lecture, what Professor Aiyede did just now, is what we need at the moment. I think the audience is limited. This is civic education firsthand. And Professor Remi Aiyede has taken out time to explain the Nigerian problem and the solution to it, which I think is not restructuring like we always say. We've done so much of constitutional revisionism up until the time Professor Remi Aiyede mentioned. And that takes me back to the issue of responsible citizenship he mentioned. And I will focus on the 2 states off-season elections we had recently, Ekiti and Osun State. We could see how irresponsible citizenship played out in Ekiti, and we could see how responsible citizenship played out in Osun State. So for us to achieve what we really want to in terms of governance and by way of changing the baton come 2023, this kind of forum is very good. I think the organizers of this program before the election should think about expanding it. We should take the social media forum to a kind of make this thing, because people need to know now votes count. there are reforms in INEC, just like Professor Remi Aiyede mentioned, at the polling unit now, it goes straight to INEC data, this thing based. So we need to educate citizens. If you collect 10,000 at the polling unit, you are mortgaging the next 4 years of your life. Then again, I would want to ask something, Professor Aiyede, before you came in, Professor Lafenwa, Dr. Lafenwa made mention of restructuring. I know your position on restructuring, but do you think that the Nigerian situation as it is at the moment can be resolved by restructuring as people clamor for now, or the institutional reforms that we've had over time is sufficient? If really we want change, it can give us the change we need? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Martin. Mr. Salawu, your question. So that will be after Mr. Salawu question. So Professor, you can answer the question, sir.
Okay.
So Mr. Salawu, your question. Hello, Mr. Salawu, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
But maybe it's having
network issues.
Because he has his hand raised, but or did he raise his hand by mistake? It's also possible.
Hello?
Okay, we can hear you now.
Now, thanks for the presentation so far, sir. My question goes thus. One, the issue of irresponsible citizen, which my earlier colleague made mention. From my own perspective, I think poverty, the rate of poverty in the country is one of the resultant effects is what we are experiencing in terms of irresponsible citizens. Nigerian citizens are hopeless due to the fact that their expectations are not always met, even considering the previous administration that they have experienced, thinking that change will eventually come and the likes. So I think the poverty that is facing the country now is what is responsible for citizens not being responsible, at least up into their expectation in terms of contributing to the inclusive governance. My own concern is now that what can we put in place that this poverty of a thing that has ruined the nation, the citizen, making them to become irresponsible, how can it be put in place, considering the different kind of economic reform that have already been put in place, which has not been materialized? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, let me start with the last question, the question of poverty and responsible citizenship. It's close to also talking about banditry, extremism, and all of that. They are often linked to poverty, but you know, one factor cannot explain critical issues like irresponsible citizenship. We must pay attention to that. For instance, we're discussing with an honorable member of the House, a former honorable member of the House of Representatives, and we told him that, look, why is it that it is now that they are talking about the impeachment of the president? And he says, look, it is not the problem of the members of the National Assembly, that given the crisis that is in the country, they would have expected Nigerians to be demonstrating, campaigning, or rising up against the government here and there all over the place. And I told him that, look, even the ASU that have been on strike for 5 months, the NSC that have joined them in demonstration and everything, what is the response from government? That it's easy, you know, to blame the victim. And that's actually the point that we must try to avoid. And that is why when I was discussing the analysis of undermining the rotation principle by people who argue that if the East wants the president, they have to work for it, they have to do this, they have to do that. And I said, look, if you want to say everybody has to work for it, so the poverty-stricken man who I remember in Abeokuta, in Ekiti, Ado Ekiti, when I went there on electoral observation, we were looking for somewhere to eat and all of that. And then, because most of the shops were shut. And then we saw some guys say, look, check that restaurant. Is it open? Ah, they say, yes, it's open. I said, are you sure? They say, yes. And then as we went there, we got there, they started begging us for money. See, I've not eaten since morning. Please, can you get us something to eat? And I said, if somebody who is meeting us a stranger, we are just asking for direction, can just jump on us and be asking that the person should not. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, please. There was an interference in my line. So I said, if people are so hungry that they are not sure of their next meal, how can you blame them for not selling their votes? Because, and that's the point that we are making, in places where poverty has become so deep-seated, government take positive action to help those who cannot help themselves. Because what we are saying, in fact, is that some people simply can't help themselves. They will be in poverty and extend the poverty to their children if nothing comes out from their environment to help them. And that's why even poverty studies will tell you about different types of poverty. There's structural poverty. There's temporary poverty. So people who are under structural poverty can't help themselves, and the government's responsibility is to bring them out of poverty. And if you don't have responsible leaders, they will rather take advantage of their poverty rather than help them or empower them out of poverty. And that's why responsible citizenship translates into responsible leadership and then translate in trying to create a responsible society. And we can go on to look at what we mean, for instance, by responsible society, what we mean in detail by responsible citizenship. A disempowered citizenship cannot be expected to be responsible at critical moments. And that's where government is important. Not only government, but those of us also who are privileged and have benefited from the system must also be responsible and recognize that even as we cry about our own disadvantage and marginalization, we must know that there are people who are worse off than us, and it is our responsibility, even as we fight for ourselves, to also fight for them. And I think that's the message I want to talk about concerning the whole idea of poverty and responsible citizenship. Then, of course, restructuring, institutional reform. You see, it's neither here nor there. Restructuring is an ongoing thing. There is no society that is not constant, that's not constantly under restructuring, because restructuring is like problem solving. When you encounter a problem, you have to take initiatives, policy changes in governance, rearrangement of powers between center and localities. Sometimes you give more power to the center. At other time, you reduce the power of the center. So restructuring is not one dimension. And that is why even in the studies of state formation, we say state formation is an ongoing thing. No state is completely formed such that it doesn't have any problem again. It's a recent survey in the United States says 1 out of every 3 citizens thinks that either white citizens or something, but I can't remember exactly whether it's all citizens or just white citizens, says that the American government is ripe for overthrow through force of arms. So within the American system, whether it's a Medicare they are talking about, whether it's even under Obama, 22 governors took the federal government to cut over Obamacare. So the whole idea is to define where the powers of government should stop, federal government should stop, and where it should begin. So the whole idea of restructuring is an ongoing thing. It never ends because the processes of state formation never really end. So my own approach is to say, as a policy person, is take issues one after the other. If you want to address the issue of higher education, for instance, how do we deal with it? And what should the federal government do? What should the state government do concerning higher education? Right now, if you look at what is happening in the higher education sector, the whole idea of what the university should look like in Nigeria has come to grief, because it seems that if those in National Assembly think that once you are a member of the National Assembly, you are entitled to have a university in your constituency. Is that the goal of higher education? Because even higher education, there's a global market for higher education. And countries restructure their higher education system according to what they seek to achieve. And sometimes, for instance, in Canada, higher education has always been highly decentralized. But there are elements of, because they want to be globally competitive, the federal government had to begin to take initiative in the higher education sector. Until that time, the federal government has no role to play in higher education at all in Canada. If you go to Sweden, you also find the same changes, especially because they are, and Germany, that are part of the Bologna process, the European process, or idea of a common higher education market. The federal government has to intervene because the federal government is the international player on behalf of the country. And so he defines the policy vision of the university system in Germany. And so because of that, he begins to find one way or the other of interacting with the state, who are the originally sole players in higher education system in those countries. So you can't just come and be talking about restructuring in general. You must talk about a problem that you want to solve and the kind of changes and initiative you need to take in order to solve that particular problem. So when in solving that problem, some changes in the institutional or the structure of the country all over may happen, but it will be a byproduct of trying to solve a problem. Not that you restructure first, then you start saying, oh, has the problem been solved? No, it should be informed by problem-solving initiative. That's why people say, oh, I ask them, okay, is the crisis in the university now, is it the result of the structure of Nigeria? So because you need to ask yourself, what exactly about the current structure is responsible for what problem? So the structure cannot be responsible for all problems the same way. So the demand of higher education in restructuring may contradict the demand for policing in restructuring. So that's my take on that. I'm not saying there should be no restructuring or there should be restructuring. I'm saying that restructuring should not be restructuring for its own sake. Restructuring must be the product of an attempt to solve specific problems, because that's only when we can connect specific problem with particular structure. So the whole idea of state formation or state development is an ongoing thing, and restructuring is an ongoing thing. But it must be founded on problems that we try to solve. So if you talk about security, for instance, some people just say state police. Nigeria is the only place where you have states without police. I say, is that how you solve the security problem? Look, secondary education has been with state government. Go and see what is happening in the secondary schools. People cannot run secondary schools effectively in many places. And thanks to state private initiative, many schools are without roofing sheets. In Oyo State, for instance, they are still doing exam now because the government could not release grants to the principals, to conduct exams. They had to postpone exams, and the students are still in school. And go and look at the quality of question papers and all of this things they are using, how they are managing, as if the state government is not endowed sufficiently to run the private public secondary schools that is under its control. So you now say, then even now, look at the Amotekun that they have set up. What kind of training have they been given? So it's not just, we have security problem, therefore state police. So if you have state police, how does it solve the problem? It's just to say that you have some people wearing uniform who say they are police of state government. How will they relate to the federal police? Or are you going to eliminate federal police and replace them with state police? Okay, if there's state police, there's federal police. So what kind of crime is state police going to police, and which kind of crime with federal police? If there's a conflict between state police and federal police, which one will have superiority? Is it not still the federal government? So that's why for those of us in the policy, public policy arena, we are a little bit more careful and circumspect with all these popular recommendations when it comes to restructuring, because they are not anchored on a clear understanding or description or the explanation of specific problems and how those problems should be resolved. And that's, for me, is the core of the matter, that if you are going to do institutional change, institutional reform, it must be geared towards solving. Look at how we have restructured discourse. The same thing, that kind of restructuring we are shouting about. I tell you, I was reading something in the conversation on the electricity sector in Ghana. They decentralize, they put private sector. They have more electricity generated than is consumed in Ghana. They said they have about 2.5 megawatts is the need of the entire Ghanaian society. But they are generating about 4,500 megawatts. Yet they cannot get constant electricity anymore because they have run into debt. In order for them, for private sector to generate electricity in that quantity, they gave them a guarantee market. Anything they generate must be paid for by the discos, whether they use it or not. So they were oversupplying and underusing and forcing people to pay for what has been supplied but has not been used. Now they say the huge debt in Ghana is connected to the debt of electricity, and they have a major electricity crisis in Ghana today. So that's why when you say restructuring, people just talk about restructuring as if it's not a complicated matter, as if it is not also reduced by politics. So we are restructuring now, and those who have power will begin to determine what they want, because in Ghana, it's politics that was driving some of the decisions that were taken. They were looking for money to run for elections. So you sponsor people to go into the electricity generation, you guarantee the market for paying for their listing, they bring the money back to politicians, they used to run election, and then the country is in debt. So that's my position, that these things are not as easy as they look. Yes, restructuring is good, but it must be designed to solve problems in a clear and open manner. And of course, restructuring, we must also try to make sure that the process is inclusive. So in the public interest also. Now, the farmer headers conflict, that, yes, it involves a lot of inclusion. In fact, the Honorable today was telling us an example about that Atisbo local government in Oyo State is not Atisbo, it's Atigo. That the Atisbo in the constitution was a typographical error. And that they now move to see if they can rectify that error by a member from the senatorial district. And when the person brought a bill to amend the constitution, to amend the name of that local government, the bill failed. And he said, you know why it failed? He said people who voted against the bill were not concerned about whether Atisbo's name is corrected or not. He said they were looking at the conflict in Just Not local government. That the people in Just Not local government, which is a contested local government in Plateau State, want that name Just Not to remain. Why those people who are traditional indigenous to that community in Just Not want the local government to be changed to an indigenous local name in that local government. And you know, that local government is contested by the outside settlers and the indigenes of those local governments. And so they were saying, if we approve the Atisbo, then we will have to also approve the change of Just Not local government. So because of that, they shut the process down. So in other words, what we are saying is that the problem of inclusion and the problem of exclusion, when it becomes conflictual, becomes even more difficult to address. And so the question then is, if you have pastoralists who are moving from place to place, they are here today when the pasture is green, and they are away when the pasture is no longer green. They are going elsewhere. And it gets to a point, as a lot of climate change, where they now leave the free pasture and encroach into people's farms to feed their herds, then you have a serious problem. And when you look at the headers conflict, you now say, okay, how do you address this problem without an inclusive approach? By bringing the headers, by bringing the farmers, by bringing conciliators or third-party intervention people, by allowing a government that is even-handed. But once you have a government that is siding one party in the conflict, then you have that conflict being protracted. And in the case of this family, that we know, of course, how complicated it has been. You know the whole question of Ruga, the whole question of colony, and all the rest. So without an inclusive approach, it's difficult to address that government. And then you need responsibility, because you must always come to that point. You need a responsible leader who is committed to an inclusive and collective solution. Because, you know, sometimes in resolving conflict, somebody has to, in any case, people have been killed already. And once you have blood already spilled, you can't get those people back. How do you pacify those who have lost members of their community without creating an environment in which those who have killed have a chance to apologize, and those who have been victims have a chance to forgive? And that's why, if you look at the whole argument about Western approach to conflict resolution through the court and judicial process, and then the political, what we call the African approach, which Mandami talked greatly about, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, the Gakaka court system in Rwanda, then you begin to understand what we are talking about when we talk about the role of inclusion in conflict resolution. It's not just about justice in terms of who is responsible and the punishment that should be meted out to the person. It's also about reconciliation. It's about apology. It's about forgiveness. You know, these are integral part of the process of conflict resolution with inclusion. And we have not seen any serious or responsible leader taking that part in addressing some of these problems. Rather, people are talking with air of superiority. They are talking because they think they have advantage. And you know, as I always say, advantage don't last forever. That's why even when you're on top, you must consider the possibility of not being on top tomorrow. Because being on top is not something that can be guaranteed eternally. But more importantly, even the weak can cause some troubles. And that's why I always make an example of Mandela's leadership, that when he became president, 80% of society was Black, and the voting population, 80% was also controlled by the ANC. But when they wanted to make policy, they said they defined their society as a rainbow community. They didn't say these white people have oppressed us so much, let's undermine them. Because it recognizes the fact that though these white are few, they can cause trouble, they can cause harm. The same thing, you don't say, oh, because we are strong now, and we have somebody who can, when it is not our turn, we say it's our turn. And then we think we can rise up, bribe everybody, win the primary. We see the problem now. After winning majority, landslide victory in the delegate primary, to get a vice presidential candidate is a problem. How can you win 1,717 in a slightly over 2,000 number of delegates? And after that, you're having problems all over the country. Are the delegates not from all over the country? Did they give you their mandate? If they give you their mandate, why are they not seeing you through? So you can't cut your nose to spite your face and think that you get it easy. Inclusion has no alternative. And that's why up till this moment, even in the United States, they are reinterpreting the Constitution to say that first it was the civil rights movement that says we the people, or what do they say? We have this truth to be self-evident, that we are born with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, they are saying that principle must now include everybody. But when they made that law, they were referring to only whites, not just like white male, privileged, tax-paying, wealthy white people. But the civil rights said, no, you have to extend this thing to the Black. And they are still fighting up to that. Now, the last time we have is Black Lives Matter, after an Obama has been president. So you can see even in the advanced countries that the struggle for restructuring, the struggle for inclusion is an ongoing thing. And we also see that you are wealthy does not necessarily guarantee inclusion under a neoliberal market economy, that efforts must be made by responsible leadership to extend prosperity to the underclass, to those who are disadvantaged. We must continuously break barriers, and you don't have to have benefited or been incorporated into the system and assume that because you and your family, you are okay, it doesn't matter. We know that until the last man have a sense of belonging, has a feeling of a sense of belonging or self-efficacy, or what Amartya Sen talked about, the capability of an individual citizen to make effective choices is achieved, you can't disregard inclusion. Otherwise, there will be no stability. Crime will be high, and no one will feel secure. And that's the argument that it's often made when they say the poor are so hungry that they can't sleep, and therefore the rich also cannot sleep because the poor are hungry. If the poor are restless, they will take it on the rich. So we should not allow, as Rousseau says, any man, any individual to be so poor that he's willing to sell himself. And that's the point, right from how many centuries ago, that no one should be so poor that he's willing to sell himself into slavery in order to survive. So when you talk about vote buying, that's what we are talking about. That some people have become so dispossessed, so hopeless within society, that in order to survive for the moment, if they have to sell their votes, they will. So for me, inclusion, there's no alternative than fighting for it, whether we are privileged or not. It is not until we become part of the underclass that we recognize the problem that is arising from exclusion from the good things of life by a significant number of citizens within our community.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for enlightening us and answering our questions. And it's great to know that in this struggle for inclusive governance, it's key for us to take it up ourselves, and we need to be responsible. And just like Mr. Martin has said, it's something that we need to start going among ourselves, need to ask ourselves, have this awareness among ourselves to ensure that we need to be responsible. We need to start taking actions so that inclusive governance we want to see, that inclusive governance, those principles that need to guide us to have an inclusive governance, we bring those principles back to play and ensure that we achieve this. So that will be the last question we'll be taking today. So we'll be rounding up the session. We are so thankful for each and every one of us that have been able to join since yesterday. So I'll hand over to Larry, who will round us up and just give us a brief thank yous for today. Back to you, Larry.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. On behalf of ApexGuide Development Center, I want to express our heartfelt gratitude to all our speakers. Yesterday we had Barrister Olufemi Adenitan, the Executive Director of Greenhouse Resource Center, and Professor Irene Pogosin, a Senior Lecturer in the Department of Political Science, who also happened to be my undergraduate project supervisor. So it was a very insightful moment with our speakers yesterday. And then today again, the conference continued and we had Dr. Stephen Lafenwa, and he took us through the role of the states in inclusive governance. And then we have our amiable Professor Remi Aiyede, the head of Department of Political Science, University of Ibadan, and he has taken us through the role of responsible citizenship in inclusive governance. Overall, it has been a privilege and an honor to have this set of scholars with us today as we look at the topic of inclusive governance. I would also like to express our profound gratitude to the moderators. We had Mr. Ayoko Samuel, who is also the president of the Association of Graduate Students of Political Science, University of Ibadan, and also one of us at ApexGuide Development Center. And I also want to appreciate Mr. Daniel Adiola, who is the program coordinator for ApexGuide Development Center, and he has been the one keeping in touch with our speakers and ensuring that everything goes on as planned. And we also like to express our gratitude to our partners and supporters in this regard. We would like to thank Liberty Watchtower, specifically Mr. Afis Adiatu, who is currently in Germany undertaking his master's program. Thank you very much for the support. And we also like to appreciate Greenhouse Resource Center. Greenhouse Resource Center is also a sister NGO in Nigeria that's also focused on social and community development. And lastly, I would like to express our profound gratitude to our participants. You guys have been a wonderful audience, and we are so happy to have you. And we hope to see you in our subsequent programs. And on that note, I would also like to inform us that in December this year, we're going to be having another conference, and more information on that will be coming up on our social media platforms. So I encourage everyone to please like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter or follow us on Instagram to get updated with regards to our programs. And in case you are wondering who we are, ApexGuide Development Center is a non-governmental organization that seeks to promote good governance and democratic development in Nigeria. And this we hope to achieve through organizing periodic seminars, conferences, and workshops that provides the opportunity for civic education, advocacy, and discussing on issues of public policy, political participation, human rights, and so on. And for those who have been asking, the the program both yesterday and today was recorded, and the video will be uploaded on YouTube and social media platforms. So you are going to have access to all of that. And so on this note, I'd like to bring the conference to an end. Thank you very much.